So there's a lot of good opportunities to say something about in these readings. This is the only time in the New Testament, and really the only other time that Melchizedek pops up. Of course, the author to the Hebrews here is referring back to in the book of Exodus when, having defeated a whole bunch of people, Abraham comes back and wanders through the territory of Salem, which is the city of peace, later to be known as Jerusalem, the same city, right? It's just doesn't belong to the Jews yet. It belongs to this fellow Melchizedek. And this king priest comes out to greet Abraham. He's doing so, whether he understands it or not, as an agent of God Almighty, an agent of the Father. He comes out. Abraham recognizes this and gives to Melchizedek a tenth of everything. Remember, he just came back from his wars with all the kings of Canaan and all the ites. And so he's just laden with treasure. And he gives a tenth of everything to Melchizedek as an offering of gratitude to the Lord for his victories, that the Lord has fulfilled what he said he was going to do and give them the land. And Melchizedek, in turn, gives Abraham an offering to God, an offering that he comes out with, not a lamb, not a cow, not 100 cows. He comes out with bread and with wine. And he offers these two substances, these two materials, as the sacrifice to the Father on behalf of Abraham, for Abraham first giving to the Father what was his due, the 10%. And so here we see this relationship developing between God and his chosen people, of whom Abraham is the patriarch. That God is going to establish them in peace by representation of the King of Peace, Melchizedek, the King of Salem, which means peace, and that relationship is going to, in some way, come from Abraham giving gratitude to the Lord as best he can by giving him some of the stuff he has, and the Lord offering to Abraham the sacrifice that he needs to give to the Father to please the Father. So in God's providence will provide for Abraham. Abraham, in God's providence to him, will be able to provide back to the Father something that he desires. This is an ancient foreshadowing of what, of course, Jesus will do, because Jesus is priest in the line of Melchizedek, he who has no beginning and he who has no end. He was fashioned in the likeness of the Son of Man, is what we're told of Melchizedek, so that Jesus can say, without any sort of retraction of his divinity, I'm a priest in the line of Melchizedek. Of course, every priest since has had this psalm and this antiphon read at their ordination. You're a priest forever in the line of Melchizedek. We remember that we are priests of God, which means we're priests of both an old and a new covenant in the line of Melchizedek in Jesus Christ. So we see that foreshadowing, and it comes to fruition in the ministry of Jesus Christ, who makes himself priest king, king of heaven and earth, king enthroned upon the cross, priest and victim, who offers himself as priest and victim upon the altar of the cross, and gives us access to that sacrifice through the same means that Melchizedek gave to Abraham to offer sacrifice to the Father, bread and wine. But now truly fulfilled. Now not a symbol of peace, but the very substance of peace. Now not a symbol of generosity, but the very substance of charity itself in the Most Holy Eucharist. End of homily 1. Let's go to the gospel, though. There's no way to necessarily join these things, but Melchizedek so infrequently spoken of, I needed to take advantage of the fact that he's said so. Like when we come up in the Eucharistic prayer 1, the Roman canon, Melchizedek comes up, right? And everybody's like, who's Melchizedek? Well, you're welcome. That's who he is. All right. Now, we have, over the last couple of days, this tension building around the Sabbath, the rest. Yesterday, and maybe even perhaps the day before, we had the disciples picking the heads of grain on the Sabbath while they're walking. There's a couple issues there with that. They're not supposed to be walking because apparently that's work. You can only walk so many steps. This is how litigious the Jews were. You could only walk so many steps on a Sabbath before it became work. And so they're wandering through these fields. They've certainly gone past their allotted steps for the day. See, as Americans, we're trying to get as many steps as we can. As Jews, they're counting down their steps. They're like, okay, I've only got 12 steps left, and the house is still at least 40 steps away. I'm in trouble. So they're wandering through the fields, and they're picking the grain, which of course is harvesting, which is work. And the Pharisees are just looking for anything that they can get on him, right? So they're like, how come your disciples don't observe the Sabbath? How come your disciples don't fast, right? And those two questions come up, and Jesus has responses to both of them. Man is not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for the man. And to why do your disciples not fast when the disciples of John the Baptist and the Pharisees do fast? He says, they can't fast when the bridegroom's with them. But there'll be an occasion when the bridegroom's taken away from them, and then they'll fast, right? Sometimes people will say, oh, see, if we're Christians, we don't need to fast. I don't know why you Catholics fast. Well, because the bridegroom is taken away from us, right? He ascended to heaven. We're waiting for him to come back. And so in the meantime, we do fast on occasion. So there you go. Now, this is where we come into sort of our third issue here. And Jesus says, so the Pharisees are watching him closely to see if he's going to cure this man with a withered hand. I mean, imagine the misappropriation of the law when you're trying to get somebody for doing something good, right? But this is what they're trying to do. They're looking to see if he's going to cure this guy's hand on the Sabbath. Now, what Jesus says is this: is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil? What he's suggesting here is that leaving this man in his wounded condition when he has the power to fix it is a sin of omission. It's an evil. It's not a choice between Jesus doing something or not doing something. What Jesus is saying is, this has been presented to me, and I now no longer have a choice. This wounded man is in front of me. Now, if Jesus didn't have the power to cure him, it would not be an omission not to cure him, right? For me, for example, I've never cured anybody physically before miraculously in my life. So I'm still working on that along with bilocation. I'll let you know when either of those things happen and we can start a line, right? But if I were there, right, and this man with a withered hand came up, and the Pharisees were watching to see if I would do something on the Sabbath. Now, I probably wouldn't. Why? Because I can't do what's being asked. Or, at least I haven't done it. There's no reason for me to think that I can do what's being asked of me. So I'm not sinning by omission. But, for example, if somebody comes up to me and says, Father, my soul is dead. I need you to raise me to life. I have the power to do that. That I've done innumerable times, right? To raise the dead to life. So it would become a problem for me if there were no reason for it. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. It is not a non-action. It is, in fact, an action. It's an omission of some good that ought to be given. Right? And so Jesus is not making something up. He's not being pedantic when he says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? Because the obvious answer is no, and Jesus says this in another place, right? He says, if your neighbor's donkey falls into the well on the Sabbath, you can go and help. Everybody knows you can go and help him get the donkey out, even if you're 12 steps past your limit. You can go help him get the donkey out, right? Nobody's going to say boo about that. Why? Because there's something evil is happening and you have a power to fix it. Again, we're not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for us. Right? And if for some reason we must exercise charity that goes against the letter of the law, especially when we're talking about the Sabbath as it is here, then by all means we have to do that. And because the Pharisees know that he's right, he publicly shames them by doing what is right, and because he does what's right, they have no recourse against him. And so what do? This is really embarrassing. It's really pathetic. They go to the Herodians to try to find a reason to get rid of Jesus. The Herodians are pagans. So while they're talking out of one side of their mouth, oh, Jesus is breaking the Jewish law, which is so dear to them, they're scurrying off to make a deal with the pagans to try to kill the one Jew that's doing what he's supposed to be doing. Missing the point, aren't they? As we come into the fulfillment of the law in Christ, we nevertheless have to remember that we have a dignity and a duty to keep holy the Sabbath. This doesn't go away. Our understanding of keeping holy the Sabbath, however, changes to doing good. To do good to ourselves first, which means we do deserve rest. We should not drive ourselves. We must not do laborious work on the Sabbath. But we can always and everywhere, especially on the Sabbath, seek those occasions where a choice is laid before us to do good or to do evil, to do that good. How may I help you today? That should be the words that fall off of our lips on a Sunday. Seeking the good, seeking to do the good for another, seeking to find that mule that's fallen into the well to help your neighbor pull it out, seeking the man with the withered hand to heal it, seeking the one who is suffering, seeking the one who is lonely, seeking the one who is lost, especially on a Sabbath, to say, how may I help you? Right? So we do all that we can to rest and to worship the Lord on the Sabbath. And from both of these things, love of ourself and love of God, worship of God on the Sabbath and rest on the Sabbath, should pour forth a willingness, not even a willingness, but a proactive search for those in need so that we can lend to them the same rest and the same gift of providence that the Father has given us.